some friends from my book club, my old book club, Putney, which is lovely. And they were dying to meet you, so I hope you don't mind.
Not at all.
Bringing in a gang.
Well, I'm usually across the river from you. I live in Chelsea, so I can see Battersea Power Station from my front door pretty much. So, I escaped to France on the 18th of December. Now I'm stuck here very happily. So God knows when I'll be back, but it's very nice to be, vicariously back in the hood, so.
Well, it's wonderful. We're just so thrilled that somebody of your great stature and great success has popped in to see our little old book club.
It's a pleasure. I mean, I do it from time to time, and because you could end up doing a book club every week if you weren't careful. So I only choose the select ones, Paddy. So yeah.
Well, we very much hope that when things settle down, that we can invite you to an actual face-to-face gathering.
Sure.
In our lovely bar that we missed so much, and we'll treat you to another cocktail.
Great. It's a deal. It's a deal.
So, well, now I thought I did actually have some wonderful questions from some of the group, and if you're happy to kick off, this is mainly focused on Love is Blind, because that was the one that was recommended by Sting.
Yeah.
And if you're that, we've got I'll invite people to step forward and ask their questions, and feel free to take as long as you want in your answer.
Will do.
So, comes on my list. Not normally this organized. Can I ask, well, have we got Manjari? Has Manjari joined us yet? No, possibly not. Okay, just...
Hello, sorry, Patty.
Hello, hi there.
Balance our iPad on something because it was too low, but yes, I'm here.
Manjari and Deepak.
And Sting.
Wait, Sting is here too.
We got our surprise guest.
She doesn't hear us.
Hi, Sting. So Patty can see you.
I can't actually, no.
Are you back in Battersea, Sting?
You're on mute.
Oh, there you are.
You're on mute.
We can't hear you.
On mute. Okay.
Oh, well done.
I'm in New York City where it's snowing like hell.
Welcome, Sting.
At least you're not in t-shirt sleeves like William.
Yeah.
Nice to see you all.
Hi, Sting.
Oh, it's wonderful to see you too, Sting. Thanks so much for dropping in.
Pleasure.
Sting, can I introduce you to Will? Because I don't think you've actually met. Is that right?
No.
No, we haven't met, but we have a curious connection, Sting, which I don't know if you remember, but in 1988, we made a film of my novel, Stars and Bars, yes, starring Daniel Day-Lewis. And I think, I mean, this is an urban myth, that you gave us an Englishman in New York to put over the end credits, because they certainly were over the end credits. So there's this curious, I've always been indebted to you for the perfect song for this movie. Here we are, 20 odd years later, I'm actually able to say thank you face to face, because I know it was about Quentin Crisp, but it actually fitted the novel to a perfect T. And it's one of Daniel Day-Lewis's strangest films, because it's the only time he's played somebody like himself, a middle-class English bloke. And so in his filmography, it stands out, but for me, it stands out because over the end credits, we played an Englishman in New York. And I said to the director, how the hell did you get hold of that song? And I think it was, thanks to you. But anyway, here we go. That's our you know, 6 degrees of separation story, but it's very, very nice to actually, you know, see you and be able to say, you know, 23 years later, thanks very much for letting us have it.
My pleasure, William. I'd actually forgotten about that, so thanks for reminding me.
No, I bet you. It was a long time ago, you know, but it's you know, Daniel's career was at the very beginning then, and nobody wanted to cast him, surprisingly. And but it was a great thing to have that song on as the end credits rolled, because it fits it perfectly, even though it's not about Daniel Day-Lewis and Stars and Bars.
That's absolutely an incredible connection.
I
and
know,
of course,
amazing story.
It's thanks to Sting that that we're have you here tonight as our special guest, our special author, because we had the most wonderful book club session with Sting before Christmas, and it was certainly the highlight of a difficult year. And at the end, our friend Katya, you can see, wave Katya. Katya asked Sting what book would he recommend for our next book club. And
I'm glad I did ask, because I absolutely loved the book. So thanks to both William and to Sting for recommending. And to the author, of course, for writing it up, because it was an excellent read.
Thank you very much, Kathy. No, it's I mean, I've had another novel published in October last year, so I hope I can remember Love is Blind. I remember my novels pretty well, actually, right back to the very early ones, because I'm pleased with them all, actually, because just the way I work, and I've never published a novel that I wasn't happy with. I mean, readers might disagree, but me as the author, I'm always very happy with them. So I have, even to my surprise, pretty surprising recall of books I wrote, you know, 40 years ago. And so I should be able to remember Love is Blind, because it was published in 2018. And even though I finished it in 2017, it should still be, you know, I hope I can answer your questions with some degree of authority.
actually, Sting, do you want to kick off? And are there any questions do you want to put to Will about that book? Because
Well, you know, when I was asked to recommend a book at the end of my session, I'd just finished Love is Blind, and I thought it was a rattling good yarn. You know, it was full of romance and intrigue and Victorian villains. And a central question which really fascinated me in the book was, what is it in pieces of music, in particular cadences, that make us feel emotional? And I'm very susceptible to that. I will listen to a piece of music and start weeping uncontrollably. And I've always wondered what it was. You know, I'm a composer, but I'm not a musicologist, so I can't really put my finger on what that is. And in the book, that question is asked. You know, what makes us cry when we hear this piece of music? You know, and
well, I mean, in a way that was the starting point for the novel, because like you, I mean, it can be a piece of bluegrass, it can be a piece of Rachmaninoff, it can be, you know, an obscure rock group that suddenly, you know, it has no emotional connection with your life. Like, it's not, that wasn't playing in the pub the night you met your wife kind of thing, but it's some sort of trigger. And so I went to talk to a friend of mine who I think you may have met, Sting. He's a very, very well-known movie composer called Patrick Doyle. He's a Scot like me. And I went to Patrick and his son, who's also called Patrick Doyle, who's composed music for a play I wrote. And I said to the two of them, I'm going to play you 7 pieces of music, and I'm going to tell you exactly when my tear ducts begin to prickle. And you can, both sitting at the piano, and I said, can you analyze exactly as a musicologically, because I'm not a musician, I love music, but I'm not a musician, what is going on here? And so I played them a whole, Brahms horn trio, Rachmaninoff's second piano concerto, a Scottish group called the Blue Nile, some Alison Krauss, bluegrass stuff, and at each time they sat down, they sort of analyzed it, because they're both trained musicians. They both went to the Royal Scottish Academy of Music and Drama. And the answer was, to put it very simply, and I stuck this in the novel, that what happens is that, I think, to put it very simply, that you're expecting the music to go somewhere, and then it's the unexpected chord, whatever that shift is, that makes you react in an emotional way that has nothing to do with your memories, your associations with the song. And I think, I asked lots of friends to give me their list of the same sort of moments in music where they reacted in the same way. And I think that is the answer, that you're expecting the music to go somewhere. And I just picked their brains, and in the novel, it's analyzed much more precisely and musicologically than I'm doing now. But it is the unexpected chord that is the trigger, I think. And you're a fabulous musician, and that may sort of seem sensible to you. It's something you're going along with the music, and then suddenly it takes another direction, and that's what makes you react. But not everybody reacts to the same bit of music in the same way. It's individual. I'm listening to Alison Krauss singing a little song called "Away Down the River," and I well up every single time I hear it. It's quite extraordinary, and that was in a way is my test case for the Doyles, father and son. I said, what is going on here? And they played it, and they talked to each other in musicological terms, which I was scribbling down, and I put it into the novel. But I think, to put it very simply, that's what happens. And if it triggers you, then it may not trigger somebody else, but it's something unexpected in the music. And it's not the instrument, it's not the quality of the voice, it's some shift that you're not expecting. So that's my theory anyway. And so I threw it into the novel, and I've yet to be challenged, I have to say. And I did run this by lots of musicians. Because the novelist, the central character is a piano tuner, and I had this really brilliant, world-class piano tuner who's the head musical technician, as they call them now, at the Royal College of Music, and was a failed concert pianist. His wife is a concert pianist. So I tried all these theories out on them, and it seemed to me that is what is going on. And maybe if you knew more about music, you could be more precise, certain chord sequences, etc., etc. But I think it's something unexpected that throws you, and it has nothing to do with your own emotional associations with the music. So I put that out there in Love Is Blind, as say, prove me wrong, musicians. But I think that's what's happening.
I think it might be part of the answer, William, but I think you could define humor in the same way. We laugh at jokes when we're surprised.
Yes, and somebody will find a joke funny and somebody else won't. It's something surprising. And I listened to. I mean, I don't know if you know this Scottish group called the Blue Nile. I was at Glasgow University, and they were just after me at Glasgow University in the 70s, and they've only released 5 albums. There's one song they sing called Sunday Morning, and I every time I hear it, I have the same effect. And it's got, it's purely and simple sort of visceral emotional response to some change in the music. And I can pinpoint it to the split second where it happens. So that's what I was showing to my 2 composers and setting them to thinking about it and analyzing it. And then I just reproduced their clever, musicological analysis and claimed it as my own. but I think that's what happened. And it's very interesting because, I giving talks about the novel, I would play a sequence from the Rachmaninoff second piano concerto, and I'd say to people, it happens now, and some would hold up their hands and some wouldn't, but it's it's a very interesting aspect of music, and I think that's what, that's why we kind of respond to it. There is something, atavistic and absolutely to do with our kind of, primitive self in a way, and when it happens, you can't deny it, but it's quite interesting to try and analyze it.
Oh, that's a fantastic introduction, Sting. Thanks very much for a wonderful, wonderful, very musicology question. And I totally agree with that change of key, because being Irish, and you do refer to
it's very prevalent in folk songs actually as well. I think it's a kind of trick that traditional folk songs have pulled on people. And you think of songs like the Sky Boat song, and I'm sure you could think of them as well, Paddy. But there are certain Scottish folk songs which, again, nothing to do with being Scottish, but to do with this curious way that the music sort of suddenly shifts and takes you by surprise and gets the old throat tightening, So I think it's something as old as the hills in a way. But it was just interesting for me as a music lover and non-musician to try and get two very experienced musicians to try and analyze exactly what was going on, and I just put it in the novel, so there it is, enshrined. I can't claim it as my own insight, but it's my own instinct, and my own feeling and response, and it's quite interesting to know why you do that, and why certain songs which don't have any, or certain pieces of music or snatches of music that have no autobiographical significance actually stimulate very unmistakable emotional response. And I think people can draw up their list of songs, and it's quite interesting to see where they overlap. A great friend of mine who's a musician sent me 10 songs that he claimed had the same effect on him, and I think 2 of them worked on me, but the other 8 didn't. So it is a very individual thing, but I think in each case I have a feeling, or that's my theory, this is what's going on.
Thank you. Sting, is that okay? Can I move on to the next person who's going to ask a question now? And you'll probably remember from the last time, I'm going to ask Manjari, who's always got a very incisive question. Manjari, can I hand over to you?
Thanks, Paddy, and thanks to William Boyd and Sting for joining, and of course our fellow book club members. So I'm not a musician, I'm not a very creative person, but I'm very intrigued by creative people. So my question really was, in this book, an accomplished musician, Kilbarron, if I pronounce that correctly, I'm also not very good at getting the accent right here. He trades his fame in for a piano. So he makes a commercial transaction. And in making this commercial transaction, he possibly inadvertently opens up his creative and personal life to commercial stakeholders. So it sounds like then Brodie kind of enters where he's come in as a commercial stakeholder, enters his life both as a creative influence, but also messing around in his personal life now. So I just wondered, and actually both of you, for William Boyd and Sting, how do you manage your commercial, creative, and personal boundaries in this world?
Well, I think it's a vocation, it's a calling, but it's also a living, and I think that all artists, find themselves in this particular. It doesn't need to be a dilemma. It just comes with the territory, and it's interesting. Somebody like my fictional composer, virtuoso John Kilbarron, is very like Franz Liszt. I mean, Liszt made a fortune in the 19th century, and a lot of these great artists were, of course, very interested in earning as much money as they possibly could as well. And it's not often given to an artist, however serious or however successful, to have a a commercial side to their art. But when it does arrive, then you have to kind of manage them both. But I think that if you're a serious artist, you know, your art always takes first place, and you want to create a work of art, but you also want as many people as possible to like it and to acquire it. And that's as old as art itself. You know, you go back to Vermeer and Rembrandt. You know, Rembrandt painted his great portraits because he made more money from portrait painting than he did from landscapes and etchings. So it's part of the artistic life, part of the artistic calling, and you want to try to make sure that, you know, can I have them both, please, and not let one, you know, the bad one, if you like, overwhelm the good one. But it applies to every single artist in every single art form, and you can be as highbrow and as serious as you want, but at the same time you realize that the art you're producing has a market value. If you're a poet, for example, who sells 10 copies of his poetry book, you'd really like to sell 20 if possible. And so it's that, so it doesn't matter how, you know, how successful you are or how modestly successful you are. All artists are aware of the fact that their art is a commodity as well as a work of art, and it's somehow trying to balance that, you know, those two factors that in a way can, you know, can be very successful, or it can destroy you. You know, there are many examples of artists who have lost the plot, you know, and so I think it's just part of the life you lead as an artist. And it's you don't live in an ivory tower. People want to buy your books or listen to your music or buy your paintings or put on your ballets or whatever. And in that process, there is a commodification. You know, there's a value, and money is paid and money is earned and so on. But I think as an artist, you want if you have any kind of success, and if you're serious, what your success gives you is the freedom to pursue your serious art form. And I think that's the balance that we all try to achieve, you know, with greater or lesser success. But there's no point in pretending that somehow it's a pure and untarnished commercially free zone. It isn't, you know, and you just have to manage it as best you can, I reckon.
Thank you.
Sting, did you want to add something?
Good question.
Well, I'm sitting here in my studio with my pencil and my notebook, and, you know, I'm not expecting to write a masterpiece today, but I know for certain, unless I turn up with this notebook and with this pencil, nothing will happen. So I think a famous golf player once said, the more I practice, the luckier I get. And I have to say, when I've been successful, I've just been lucky, like fishing. Some days you catch a fish and some days you do not. I'm hoping today I'll catch a fish. Maybe William will inspire me.
No, I think you're right, Sting. There is a huge luck element in it, because you're dealing with, you know, concepts and ideas that are so ephemeral. You know, like, you know, an idea for a novel, like you have an idea for a song. It's then there's a whole technical side that comes into play, but there's no guarantee that idea you had is going to be, you know, going to chime with your readers. It's takes me about 2 to 3 years to write a novel. I'm sure that, I mean, it takes you, some songs maybe have taken that long to come to fruition, but there is a vast amount of luck. And, you know, that the other quote I like, which is sort of like your golfer's quote, is that from Fred Astaire, which says, if it looks difficult, you're not trying hard enough. And so I think that That if you, the sense, there is a sense of hard graft, you know, and then it becomes, you know, you kind of earn your luck in a way. If you work hard and you turn up every day at the desk and you try your best to come up with, you know, ideas, whatever you're writing, a film or a short story or you know, a novel. I think that's the other thing, that it doesn't look like hard work to people who have, you know, proper jobs, but you're constantly, your brain is constantly engaged. And I think if you just sort of float around waiting for inspiration, you may be floating around for a very long time, you know. I think you kind of earn your good fortune by working hard. You know, that's my Scottish Calvinist background speaking probably, but I write every day something, you know, whether it's just a page of my journal or I'm polishing a screenplay or I'm making notes for the next novel I'm going to write. I'm pretty sure you do exactly the same. It's a 7 days a week job being an artist, you know. It's and I think a lot of people who dream of being an artist don't understand that one of the things you have to have, apart from inspiration and all talent and all that sort of thing, is stamina. You know, it's hard work. You know, takes a long time. You know, and if you want it, nothing comes easy. You know, so it's so I think that's a very, very good point about the process. That it's as Guy de Maupassant said, you know, to any writer who was looking at, said, just put black on white, you know, ink on paper, just start. You know, if you don't do that, you'll never get an idea. So I think that's one of my sort of mantras I quote to myself: put black on white. You don't feel like it, you sit down at your desk, your head is empty. But if you don't put black on white, you know, nothing's going to change. You know, so I think it's a real lesson for people that actually, you know, the hard graft aspect of an artistic life is extraordinary. I mean, I got to know David Hockney, for example, in the last 10 years or so. And, you know, David is now in his 80s. He works every single day, you know, and he's an incredible example of somebody who, you know, he's, you know, he how many years does he have left, he would say to himself. So he's not going to waste one by not working and painting and drawing and going out into the landscape. And he's just done a 60-meter drawing, painting, which is going to hang in the Orangerie in Paris this coming spring, which is like the same size as the Bayeux tapestry. You know, so he's an extraordinary example of the artist as hard worker. And I think, you know, it's applies to absolutely everybody.
It's wonderful, Will. I recognize the quote from Guy de Maupassant from your latest novel.
That's right.
Which I'm reading and loving at the moment. Now, Manjari, that was a fantastic question. I know you've got another one. Do you mind if we come back to that in a bit? I'd like to ask Catherine Orrell to unmute herself. Catherine, you've got a literary question.
Well, it sort of slides in nicely with Guy de Maupassant. But first of all, William, can I just say how thrilled I am that you love Alison Krauss, because I'm a huge fan as well.
Oh, right. Me
and
too.
I know what you mean about just bursting into tears. So it's very, she's absolutely amazing. I grew up in Alberta in Canada, where bluegrass is strong.
Oh, right, right. Yeah, it's no, she is extraordinary. And check out this particular song, which is called "Away Down the River," and it's quite interesting because it's actually got a few lines of a Robert Louis Stevenson poem in it, which is ties in with "Love Is Blind," because I've got a Robert Louis Stevenson quote at the front, and so that's just another little sort of implicit nod to Alison Krauss and her amazing, ethereal voice.
I love that. Actually, my question is about writers. So I was picking up on the references you were making, both overt and sort of by implication, to 19th century Russian writers and 19th century Scottish writers. I wondered, other than Guy de Maupassant, who is from another period, but what 19th century French writers you feel a connection with, since so much of this novel takes place in France, and whether there are any particular ones that you would say have influenced your writing.
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, I have a kind of love affair with Russian literature, but it's very selective. And of course, I've read my way through the canon of Scottish literature. But I've actually just written a little piece for a French magazine about Flaubert, because it's his 200th birthday coming up this year. And I've also written a novel called The New Confessions, which was
I'm just reading that at the moment,
which is steeped in Jean-Jacques Rousseau, strange, crazy man. And it's I'm because I live in France and I went to French university and I speak fluent but not perfect French. I've read a great deal of French literature. And certain authors, are absolute favorites. Albert Camus is one, and again, I find that the more I read an author, the more I get intrigued by the life of that author. And I'm very interested in Camus' life. But the French author I'm currently obsessing about is Stendhal. And he wrote The Red and the Black and the Charterhouse of Parma. But Stendhal is the most extraordinary, a bit like Rousseau. He's a man out of his time. He could be living today. He's as nutty and as contentious and as modern a spirit as any of us. And he wrote this extraordinary book, which is meant to be a fake biography called The Life of Henri Brulard. And but Henri Brulard is Stendhal, whose real name was Jean-Marie Bayle, in fact. So he's hiding behind a series of identities. And the book is a bit like the Confessions of Rousseau. It's a totally honest account of his early life in theory. But in fact, he just jumps around. He flashes forward, flashes back. It's full of funny little illustrations. But so Stendhal is my current French obsession, but I have a good few of them. And I suspect that in the novel I'm about to write, in the novel that I'm planning and figuring out in my head, that Stendhal will be lurking behind the novel in the way that in Love is Blind, Chekhov lurks behind the novel. And in fact, Chekhov makes an appearance in the novel himself, even though he's never named. But and so I think, I spent a long time studying literature and teaching literature at university. And so I'm kind of steeped in it, but I don't respond to it in an academic way. So I'm just like another reader. And so it's the personalities and the tone of voice and the world view of the authors I read that I respond to, as all readers do. And there are some writers that I find particularly close to my own, world view. And in Russian literature, it would be Chekhov and Gogol, not Dostoevsky or Tolstoy. And in French literature, it's these mavericks like Rousseau and Stendhal and Camus, in a way, who was again a sort of an outsider in the French literary canon, but all very interesting people, as well as being very interesting writers. And so when you kind of immerse yourself in their work and in their life, it can be very, very revelatory, and inevitably it sort of finds its way into the novels I write. And I have this definition of the novel, which is one of the definitions of a novel, which is a novel is the sum of all the things the novelist was interested in at the time of writing. And so I think it's very true, because it all kind of goes into the hopper and comes out on the page. And I could look back at my own novels and see what I was interested in at the time of writing them. And, you know, Love is Blind is a very good example of my interest in Russia and Russian literature. I went to St. Petersburg because I had a play on there, extraordinary. I had a play that I'd written, which is based on 2 Chekhov short stories. And it was translated into Russian and put on in St. Petersburg. And I think it's still running there, actually, in repertory. And I thought, well, you know, talk about coals to Newcastle, you know, British playwright writes a Chekhovian play and it gets put on in St. Petersburg. So that was my engagement with the city. And it was an amazing production. And that also went into Love is Blind. You know, the whole St. Petersburg sequence is directly inspired by my visit to the city and the Chekhovian kind of, you know, ambience around it.
May I just ask a quick supplementary question? The dreadful relationship between Brodie and his father feels very sort of like Walter Scott or Robert Louis Stevenson or something. Is it the Scottish world that?
Yes, I think, I mean, it's not autobiographical. I got on very well with my father, but the demonic father figure is very common in Scottish literature. And you know, Stevenson wrote about it. James Hogg, The Confessions of a Justified Sinner. It comes up again and again for some reason. Maybe Scottish fathers are particularly hard on their children. I don't know, but it's. I mean, in another funny way, Love is Blind is my most Scottish novel, and there are lots of allusions to, you know, Scottish tropes, if you like, or Scottish themes, and indeed nods and winks to certain works of Scottish literature, which are just embedded, that you don't need to know about them, but if you to enjoy the novel. But if you do, you get a little extra kick out of it. But it's and it's funny. I mean, I'm a Scot. Both my parents came from Fife, but I was born and raised in Africa, so I'm kind of an exiled alien, you know, deracinated Scot. So I may be looking back at the country my parents came from with slightly more objective eyes, and seeing the Scottish nature such as it is, with a slightly more objective point of view. But I gave it free rein in Love is Blind anyway.
Thank you.
Thanks, Catherine. Great question. Yeah, it was interesting you picked up about the father, because certainly that, because I've just read before Trio, The Ice Cream Wars, and there was a pretty awful father there as well. I was beginning to think,
yes,
definitely there's a theme running through this.
It's very unusual. I think as an author, you never know. I mean, I often write about brothers, and I don't have a brother, and so it's. I think it's quite good to be a bit ignorant about your own, you know, nature and why you write about certain things. So I deliberately don't overanalyze why, you know, awful fathers appear in my novels, or why siblings, you know, don't get on or whatever. But it's a certain amount of ignorance is a good thing for a novelist to have, I think.
Yes, I think that probably answers a few of us put in questions about the father. There's obviously a little bit of concern going on amongst us. Actually, you mentioned the geographical aspect of your book, which was very wide-ranging indeed, in terms of where Brodie ended up throughout his misadventures. And Diana Andrade, I don't know if Diana's with us. Diana, if you are, could you unmute?
Wrong Diana.
Diana Andrade. I'm not quite sure if she's actually made it. But hi, Diana, anyhow. No, it doesn't sound as if she's here, so I'll quickly move on. Jane Parrott. Jane, would you like to pose your question? Just unmute yourself.
Paddy, I knew you were going to do this. Just when the question about the father had been asked, and I was just having a quick look to see what my other question was. I had 2 questions, Paddy. Can you remind me what the other one was?
Right, I'm trying to read with my contact lenses.
Oh, I know, I was trying to read too, because I don't want to ask another question about the father relationship.
So,
I'm sorry about this, Will. Your story was so absolutely full of amazing stuff, and I love the fact that you covered such a broad spectrum of geography and wine and music and women and all of that. And I did think he must be 250 years old to even know all this. But then I feel a bit churlish asking a backstory question, which was about the father, and I can't remember my other question, so I'll go with it, Paddy.
I have got the other question here.
Oh, have you? Okay. What was my other question?
Does William believe that it was the opportunities or the threats that were the major shapers of Brodie's short but full life?
I'll go with that rather than pressurizing you on the father-son relationship again. There was so many things that steered him, William. I wondered which you felt was the most powerful.
Well, I think it's a good question. I mean, I think that it's meeting Lika Bloom that transforms his life, and it's a theme that I've touched on in other novels as well. That even if it's unrequited, sometimes a person you meet actually ends up dominating your life, and the relationship between Brodie and Lika is intensely passionate. But because we only see things from Brodie's point of view, we never know for sure if Lika feels the same. And she never says in the course of the novel, I love you, even though Brodie's constantly telling her how much he loves her. And so I think I deliberately did this in the reader's mind. I wanted to build up a certain doubt about the extent to which Lika was sincere, or whether she was in some way using Brodie. And I think that the answer is, at the end of the day, she is sincere, because she travels all the way out to the Andaman Islands to see him, even though she's led him a bit of a merry dance in the meantime. And I think that however complex the love affair was from her point of view, it was a genuine one, and that's recognized, I think, in the very final letter by Page, in the kind of postface almost of the novel, where the two women look at Brodie's grave, and Lika has this verse from this song, this key song that made her cry, engraved on the wooden headstone. But it's interesting, that sort of overwhelming, coup de foudre love affair can absolutely destabilize a life. And if you're lucky, it becomes fulfilled. But if you're unlucky in the way that Brodie was, because of circumstances and Malachi Kilbarron and his pursuit, and Lika's attempt to save him, the whole thing kind of collapsed and went to hell in a handcart. But I think that from Brodie's point of view, it is utterly the defining nature of his life, and everything he did from that moment when he saw her, when he had that encounter in the dressing rooms of the theater in Paris. He in a way was obsessed with her in a good way, and he would do anything in order to be with her, including going to Russia to work for John Kilbarron, which is probably the last thing he wanted to do, but that's the only way he could see her. So that's the propulsive force in his life, that obsessive, single one track, love affair with Lika, and he doesn't really care what else happens along the way, as long as he can somehow, you know, be near her or see her from time to time. So that's what, you know, overwhelms his life, and he sort of runs with it, you know,
Oh, thank you.
takes the
That
consequences.
that is really heartwarming, because he had a lot of bad stuff pushing him as well, you know, disease and
such is life, you know.
Threat of death from other people, and losing his job and all of that. So you're saying that it was the hope that was his major driver, and I love that answer. Thank you.
Yeah, that was the redeeming feature of his life, you know, and he, you know, he is a bit of a Chekhovian figure. I mean, Chekhov, who died aged 44, knew at the age of 23 that he had tuberculosis, and because he was a doctor, he knew exactly what was going to happen to him. And I think that knowledge made Chekhov the man he was. And actually, I took Chekhov's last moments and gave them to Brodie, because Chekhov was in a German spa town in 1904, and he was seriously ill with tuberculosis. And German doctors, when they realized there was no hope for the patient, used to bring them a glass of champagne. So when the doctor brings you a glass of champagne at the bedside, you know you haven't got very long left. So I gave Chekhov's death, even his last line, "Ich sterbe," which means I'm dying, as he drinks the champagne, is the Chekhovian echo there. But it's no, I think he's serene in the sense that his last moments, he believes Lika has come into the room. And so I think that for Brodie, in a way, is enough, is a kind of vindication. And then we see, the readers, we have this little postscript where we see that Lika actually did come all the way across the world to this remote island. I mean, I've never been to the Andaman Islands, but I did a lot of research, and I think that shows that when she said, I will knock on your door one day, and sure enough, she did, but it was too late.
She was too late.
Hence the title, you know, Love is Blind, you know.
I think I will put the champagne thing in my lasting power of attorney when I eventually get around to it. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks, Jane. It's brilliant. Sorry if I put you on the spot, but you covered incredibly well. Now, I think a lot of the questions that were put in have probably been already covered, Will, in your incredibly detailed and incisive answers. Now, can I just throw it out to anybody? Have I missed anybody's question? And if I have, can you unmute yourselves?
Hey, my question was actually in relation to what was just spoken about. I'm not sure if you guys hear me. It was regarding Alika and how she did show up in the end, proving her affection. However, the fact that she had the exact line at the end of the poem made me question whether she ever did lose that poem to begin with, and whether she had kept it all along, and maybe it got into my thought whether she had instigated giving the music and the lyrics and everything to John from the very beginning. So I was wondering if that was something that you were considering, or if you wanted to keep it open-ended, or...
You're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. It's a possibility. And I mean, when I write, you know, all my novels have quite complicated plots. You know, I love reading novels that, you know, make you think and make you wonder what's going on. That's why I like the spy novel genre, for example, where it's almost like the prerequisite. And it's the same with my orthodox novels. There's always a lot of narrative, but I don't want to tie up every knot neatly at the end. And so I set these kind of hairs running, and you're absolutely right to be suspicious of Lika. And I'm sure, and I have you know, I could give you the answer because I wrote the thing after all, but the reader is meant to have a kind of ambiguous interpretation of what's going on. Is she genuine, or did she steal it and pass it on to John Kilbarron as a way of currying favor, you know. So all these options are possible, and I think it's because I'm a realistic novelist, I don't want every answer to be neatly packaged, and life is complex and life is full of nuances and uncertainties. Therefore, if you're writing a realistic novel about somebody's life, those uncertainties and those various interpretations should be part of it as well. So there are quite a few things in Love is Blind, or indeed in all of my novels, where you, the reader, are absolutely entitled to condemn Lika as a calculating so-and-so, or else think, you know, it was John Kilbarron who pinched it because he heard them practicing. So I really believe that sort of creative ambiguity adds to the realistic, you know, heft of the novel. And it's you know, good that people can, or readers can, sort of mull it over and come to differing conclusions and have differing assessments of the characters, of the principal characters, and so on, because that's how we wander through our own lives. You know, we don't have anything like all the answers, and we make judgments and we make interpretations that could be entirely wrong. And we invent our own short stories to explain people's behavior or people's lives, and that sort of creative uncertainty can be very, you know, is very true to life. And so I leave these open endings deliberately. It's like, you know, at the end of my novel Trio, you know, we don't know what will happen to the characters, but you can imagine a kind of life for them beyond the end of the novel, rather than me, you know, tying it all up neatly.
Lovely, thank you.
Thanks, Diana. That was brilliant. Katya, you've got your hand raised. Oh, sorry.
Yes, please. Hi.
Even next.
Oh, I'm sorry. Yes, actually, speaking about Lika and the whole Brody-Lika relationship, I heard from a few people, William, that they were disappointed with the ending of the story, but I absolutely loved it. I thought it was actually great that he died at the end, in a way that it's almost, you could see his whole life, how he got hung up on this relationship and how it was eaten into every aspect of his life. And sure enough, it kind of made a full circle and came to the end. So I thought it was brilliant. I didn't quite trust Lika, and I thought Brody made a mistake of not, you know, making other pursuits. It was a bit too much. As a relationship, obsessive, blind to everything around him, absolutely blind in that sense. But my question was actually about, how did you feel as a writer writing about something, the time or the era you've never lived through and the places you haven't been so familiar with? How do you do your research? How do you even start that journey?
Well, I think the answer is quite simple. It depends on the kind of writer you are. I think, you know, there are many divisions you can make of types of writers. And one of the divisions is some writers only use their own lives as raw material for their fictions. And other writers make things up or invent things. And I'm definitely in that last category. I use my imagination. And in a way, that's what is, for me, so stimulating about writing fiction, is I can travel anywhere, be anybody. I've written 4 novels from the point of view of a woman. You know, I've changed sex to write a novel, and I can travel through time. It's interesting that all the places I think that Brody goes in the novel are places I have been to. Some I know very well, some I've visited once, but I haven't been to the Andaman Islands. But I don't need to go to the Andaman Islands. I just send my imagination, and I look at photographs, and I read books, and I look at maps and street maps and so on. I wrote an entire novel called The Blue Afternoon, which is set in Manila in the Philippines in 1902. I've never been to the Philippines. And but people who have lived in Manila have asked me, when did you live here and where did you, etc. So it's, you can do it. Fiction is faking it in a way, and the better you are at faking it, the more successful your fiction. And I'm an experienced enough writer now. I've written 16 novels. I know how to make it seem as if I know everything about the subject I'm writing about.
You sounded really persuasive, because I've read a great deal of Russian literature at school and otherwise, and it did feel like reading one of those books which, you know, Dostoevsky, who lived there and who knew every single corner of St. Petersburg. So yes.
Yeah, no, I know how to do my research now, and I know, and it's very interesting being the research you do as a novelist is different from the research you do as an academic, because you're looking for little details that kind of resonate, and so you're a kind of magpie. You pick certain facts that do a lot of work for you, I think I know how to do this now, having written so many novels. But it's part of the sheer pleasure for me to go out of myself, to imagine myself as a different character in a different setting, in a different time zone, and then to make that world as real as possible to the reader. You know, and there are certain tricks of the trade, but a lot of it is basically about using your imagination, you know. And if you have a fully developed imagination, you can almost imagine anything, you know. And so that's the kind of exercise. Those are the muscles I flex, if you like, when I'm writing. I try to imagine things I've never experienced, could never experience, and try to make them as real as possible.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kasia. I think we've got Diana after all.
Yes,
Diana?
sorry for the late arrival. Hi, everybody. Nice to see you after so long. Hello, William. Thank you for joining us today. I think my next question, I had two. One of them definitely answered already. The other one was in relation to the Andaman Islands. So you've already mentioned you don't have any specific background or connection there. I was wondering, how did you arrive to that location? Was it a bit like Brody in the book, spinning the globe randomly, and how come?
Pretty much. I mean, I was thinking of a remote place where you go, somewhere really remote, and I found on my bookshelves a book which I must have bought. I don't know why I bought it, but it's a work of anthropology that was published in 1907 or something like that, which takes place on the Andaman Islands. And I just thought, well, that's an interesting locale, and then I started doing research about the islands and where they were and what their history was, and realized that it was a perfect place to send Brody. Now, this is where, again, there's a kind of literary echo, because it's my Scottish novel. Robert Louis Stevenson, possibly the most famous Scottish novelist, born in Edinburgh, died in Samoa. And I wanted Brody, who sort of, in a way mirrors Robert Louis Stevenson. Stevenson died when he's 44 as well, same age as Chekhov. And he died in Samoa. He miles, across the globe from Scotland. So I was looking for somewhere that was so far away, and that would have this kind of Stevensonian echo of a Scotsman dying in the tropics. And so it was almost like not quite putting a pin in the map, as Brody does with the two brothers in Trieste, but it was just a book on my shelf, and I suddenly thought, that's it. That's these are the kind of again, a bit as Sting said, this is a bit of luck you get in your day, where you stumble across something and actually it becomes a very interesting and significant part of the novel. But it is kind of random. I knew I wanted somewhere remote, but it could have been anywhere remote. But then the fact that I had bought this book for some reason, stimulated me to make that choice.
And I guess it then built in the factor of the the anthropologist
Yeah,
research
exactly.
and everything else that
Then I
just came
started
from that.
researching anthropology, which was a very young science at that time. And Margaret Mead, I don't know if you know, she was a very famous American anthropologist who actually did study in Samoa and wrote a very groundbreaking book about, you know, marriage customs in Samoan, primitive Samoan society. But the Andaman Islands, as I researched it, became very, very interesting because there are two main islands, and they're separated by an 11-mile, you know, channel. But because they've been so isolated, they've developed in totally different ways, different languages, different cultures, and so on. Yet they're only 11 miles apart. So it became a very interesting, you know, end to the novel, to take Brodie out of his European world, if you like, and put him down in a world where all his European values were as strange and as idiosyncratic as the values of the Andaman Islanders. And I think that's something that at the end of his life he begins to realize that, you know, there's nothing set in cement about being a Western European, you know, and that the Andaman Islanders' life is as fulfilled and as rich as the life of a middle-class Edinburgh piano manufacturer, you know. So it's a part of that kind of cultural contrast that I wanted to establish at the end of the novel there. But that's what, you know, that's all the stuff you're interested in can go into the novel. You know, it's the most wonderful art form because it's so generous. You can do anything with it, and you can stick all the stuff you're interested in it if you do it skillfully. And it's the most extraordinarily generous of art forms, and it's a wonderful liberation actually to write a novel, because there are no boundaries, there are no conventions, there are no impossibilities. Whereas I write a lot of films and television. You know, film and television is a world of, you know, impossibilities and parameters and compromises. And so to move from the freedom of the novel to the constrained world of film is often something of a challenge to me. I have to change mental gears because the art form is not as free as the novel is.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Just before I pass on the token to a fellow reader, I just wanted to comment on something that I found quite interesting, was the fact that the first chapter is written by Paige. So you start reading the book, and you know, at least it happened to me incorrectly. I assume the story is about her, like, you know, you're trying to, you know, find out about this, and then on the next chapter it switches over to Brodie, and then it goes all the way to almost the end until it loops back. So I thought that was quite an interesting move. I found that very,
yeah. I mean, it's I think the beginnings of novels are so important. You know, the first page of a novel is absolutely vital, because, you know, you want the reader to be intrigued and curious and think, I'll read on here, what's going on. And so to read a letter as a kind of introduction about this young man, Brodie Moncur, and then to cut, if you like, cut back to Edinburgh in 1896. And how does Brodie Moncur get from Edinburgh to the Andaman Islands? And in a way, that's a question I wanted to put into the mind of the reader. And so the reader has to read on 350 pages to find out the answer to it. So it's a slight technical, you know, sleight of hand, if you like, to a kind of grabber, you know, like, if you're intrigued by this, then, you know, the rest of the novel, with a bit of luck, will be as stimulating as the first 2 or 3 pages. And so I think as a novelist, as a writer, you kind of owe that to your readers. You know, you've written this long book, they've paid their money to buy it, and they want to be held, they want to be, you know, amused, shocked, you know, learn stuff. So there's a real unspoken contract between writer and reader, I think, and the relationship between writer and reader is unique. You know, all you guys who've read Love is Blind have a totally unique relationship with it, and therefore with me, the novelist. And I think that's quite an interesting aspect of the novel form as well. I mean, it's true, if you look at a painting, you have a unique relationship with it, but something about reading a novel, you know, over many days or a few weeks, that you build up a relationship, even unconsciously, with the story that the novelist is telling you, and your interpretation of it is totally, that one-on-one relationship is totally unique. It's not replicated anywhere else.
Thank you, Diana. Wonderful, wonderful questions. And it's great to see you again. Diana used to live here, and she went away from us like Jane, but I'm sure she'll come back. Now, I just wanted to let you know at this stage that there are some other questions to come through, Will. I don't know if you're happy to Sting, or are you happy to
keep them coming,
stay on with us?
Yes, I'll have to go and have some supper at some stage, but not yet. So do fire away.
Just let us know. I don't want you starving. I can see Sting writing away in his notebook. I think there's going to be.
Poor Sting had this issue last time, if I remember rightly. He was desperate to get off of some food. We dragged him on to the bitter end.
Well, in that case, I'd like to Harshvinder to unmute herself, please. And Harshvinder, put your question to Will.
Yes, I have a question for Will, and also have a little comment to Sting as well. Sting, I ordered a case of your Message in a Bottle Bianco, which I decided to pour myself, and I thought if I like it, I'll give you feedback. Happily, I love it. So that's good. So the question for Will, my original question you've answered, because all about making everything, all the area just seems so realistic. So you've said it's your imagination, and I congratulate you on that, because I just wondered whether you were putting in some real locations or real stores, shops, hotels, restaurants. But so I'm going to move away from that, and I'd like to ask you about Sweet Caress. You put photographs in that, and I wondered whether so as you said that you use a lot of imagination, so I get those photographs weren't real, and where did you pick those photographs up, and what made you include photographs in that novel?
Well, you're absolutely right. They're all anonymous photographs. I don't know who took them. I don't know anybody. I bought them in junk shops or on eBay. But it's part of, I put them in because I've written these novels. I've written 4 or 5 of them, I think you could say, which are whole life novels, like cradle to grave stories of a person's life. And Sweet Caress is the story of Amory Clay, who's a professional photographer. And again, going back to something I said earlier, I'm a realistic novelist. And I realized throughout my novel writing career, I've always been pushing fiction so far into the world of fact that the reader begins to doubt if it's fiction. Particularly with my long, what I call my whole life novels, like New Confessions or Any Human Heart or Sweet Caress, or even Love is Blind is pretty much a whole life novel as well. But Sweet Caress was an attempt to make readers, go to their Google and type in Amory Clay to see if such a photographer actually existed. And I do like playing with that boundary between fiction and fact, and it makes what it does is it makes your fiction more powerful. I think if people believe or have a moment's doubt that perhaps there was a real person and she did take these photographs and I never heard of her, it makes your fiction kind of live and breathe in a way that an orthodox novel doesn't. And something I've done many times, and perhaps, I don't know if you know about my famous art hoax, which I did with David Bowie, where I invented a painter called Nat Tate, and I used photographs again, and it became, this is 1998, it's a long time ago, but it's the most famous hoax, literary hoax that I've created. And it was again in the same same process in order to take something utterly made up, totally fictional, and make it seem so real that people begin to doubt its fictionality. And that's exactly what I was trying to do in Sweet Caress. And it was a fascinating experience. There are 73 photographs in that novel, which I think might be a record, actually. But they're all either meant to have been taken by her, or are photographs of her, in some cases taken by other people, but they're all photographs I found, and by factoring them into the narrative and by writing a caption, suddenly her fictional life becomes almost rooted in the real world. And for a while I was worried that the photographs might detract from the fiction, but in fact, as soon as the book was published and the reviews started coming in, I realized actually the photographs enhance the fiction. It makes Amory's life seem absolutely as if she had actually lived and actually taken these photographs. And for me, as a realistic novelist, in a way, that's the ultimate ambition, you know, to sow this doubt in the reader's head about, am I reading something that was made up, or am I reading something that is real? And I think if, you know, we're so dominated by news and reportage and history and journalism, fact, 24-hour news, that actually you forget how powerful fiction can be, and how fiction speaks to us in a way that no reportage or historian or journalist can do. And part of I look back now and see part of what I've been doing over the years has been pushing fiction into the world of documentary and history and so-called reality, and making the fiction all the more powerful. I mean, I use this example, you know, cannibals eat the brains of their enemies to make them more strong. So I'm eating the brains of historians and journalists and documentary makers to make my fiction more strong. And I think it's, you know, when it works, it's really successful. And particularly for these whole life novels, these cradle to grave novels that I write, readers seem to respond to the characters, the central character, in a way that's different from the way they respond to an orthodox novel. So it's never a grand plan, but as my writing life has, you know, unspooled, it's something I've done again and again. And I look back now and I can see it's something that I'm sort of obsessed about.
Well, you do put so much realistic detail in, even though it's your imagination, that constantly throughout Love is Blind and through Sweet Caress, I kept thinking, I must Google that. I must Google that. So
yeah, well, that's exactly right. I mean, a lot of it is just hard research. You know, like what kind of food would you eat in St. Petersburg, you know, at that time, and what kind of restaurants were there? So I find out, and then I write a scene where Brody goes to a restaurant, he orders certain kind of food and so on. Or how do you travel from A to B? If you wanted to buy a gun in France in 1902, how would you do it? You know, all that sort of stuff I research, and then I factor it into the story I'm telling in a way, you know, again, it's a certain amount of skill involved, in a way that makes it seem natural and seamless. You know, I'm not just unloading all the research I've done on the reader. It somehow has to justify itself. And so you cherry pick those bits of information you want, and you put them in the novel so that it seems entirely naturalistic. So it's a combination of diligent researching, and then sifting through all the facts you have, and then choosing the ones that will work for you best in a way that doesn't seem obtrusive or heavy-handed. You know, it's a kind of technical operation, but again, it comes back to the fact that you want the world you create and the people who populate that world to seem as real and three-dimensional as possible. That they're living, like, as if they're living, breathing human beings, and almost as if you could meet them somehow. You know, I think that's the ambition as you know, the great, you know, the realistic novel writing is, if you like figurative painting. You've got all sorts of different types of novels and all sorts of different types of painting, you know, but I am a realistic novelist, and I'm trying to make my world as realistic as possible. As a figurative painter painting a portrait or painting a landscape, tries to make it as real as possible. I'm not interested in abstract painting or abstract or experimental novel writing. I think the novel speaks about the human condition better than any other art form available. And so, the more achieved it is, or the more, textured and rich and thorough it is, the better. So that's what one strives for.
Thank you.
Gosh, Vinda, I think to say that a certain amount of skill is involved is probably the understatement of the century. Now, Marcy and Stephen, as you've popped up on the screen, you've got a question for Will.
Yeah, hi. Well, coming back to Love is Blind, the main character is a piano tuner. There aren't many piano tuner protagonists in the history of literature. How does one come to create the idea that I'm going to have a protagonist that's a piano tuner? I mean, do you wake up in the middle of the night dreaming of it? I mean, most people don't dream about piano tuners.
It's a very good question. I mean, it's to do with this, what I was saying to Sting, that this idea I had that sort of started the novel off, that certain types of music seem to be able to provoke emotion without you understanding why. And then I very quickly ran up against this obstacle, because it's very difficult to write about music in fiction. What can you say? The second movement was sublime. There are very few good novels about music, interestingly. And so I thought, well, if I'm going to do this, what's my angle in on the world of music? And I thought, shall I make my character a musician, like a violinist or something, or a composer? And I was sitting in this wonderful club I'm a member of in London, the Chelsea Arts Club, not far away from Battersea Power Station. And they have a Steinway piano in the club, and somebody was tuning it that day when I was in. And it was that light bulb over the head moment. I thought, I know, that's how I write about music. I write about a piano tuner, a sort of technical, almost engineer of music, rather than a spiritual artist figure. But of course, I didn't know any piano tuners at all. But through a friend of a friend of a friend, I got in touch with this man called Clive Ackroyd, who is the senior piano tuner at the Royal Academy of Music in London. And I wrote him an email and said, could I pick your brains? And he was so thrilled that a novelist was actually going to write about a piano tuner that he told me all his secrets. And so I acknowledge him in the book, but without Clive, I couldn't have written that novel. But I think it was a very smart idea of mine, and it's quite a good idea that instead of writing about a painter, maybe it's a good idea to write about somebody who makes oil paints that they sell to painters, and you kind of get into the world of art obliquely, and you dealing with nuts and bolts and physical objects rather than ethereal emotions and fantasies and so on. And the fact that once I started learning about the world of piano tuning, it was completely fascinating. And Clive Ackroyd, told me so many stories, so much gossip, and he tunes pianos for the world's greatest pianists. So, Ashkenazi, the Lebec sisters, and so on. So he's right at the top of the profession. And when I said to him once, I said to Clive, next question, would it be possible to sabotage a piano during a concert? And he said, I've been tempted many times. So the two of us cooked up this. If you've read the novel, you'll know that there's a very successful sabotage, but it could happen. And I came up with a very good way of sabotaging a piano, but he actually said, no, my way is better because nobody will know it's a sabotage. And so it was fantastic. It's one of those, again, stroke of luck, that this man who was at the very apex of his profession was happy to share his secret knowledge. And he took me to piano museums. I saw him tune a piano for a concert. I did all that research. And everything I learned from him, you know, again, I cherry picked it and put it into the novel. But fundamentally, to answer your question, it was the problem of writing about music in fiction. It's so unsatisfactory. I mean, can anybody think of a good novel about music? I've found about 4, I think, in the history of of novel writing, because it's all so fey and, you know, wishy-washy. And so you needed, that's what was so great about a piano tuner, because it's all about this incredible machine that is the piano. It's an extraordinary creation. When you take it apart and look at its innards, you know, it's like something from Heath Robinson. You know, it's a most extraordinary contraption. And so that was again, that was a very good stroke of luck early on in the beginnings of the novel, that when I had this idea and then investigated how to bring it into being, that Clive Ackroyd was so generous with his secrets.
Well, that's interesting, because we had, after reading the novel, we had a piano tuner to our home to tune our piano. And we were terribly disappointed that he wasn't as emotional and as humane as Brody. He was rather a technocrat. We were expecting Brody to tune our piano, well, having read the book, and he was not that at all. Right?
No, it is a very sort of technical, functional job. But the interesting thing about Clive is, I said, "Why did you become a piano tuner, Clive?" And he said, "Because I'm a failed pianist." And so that he knew he couldn't make it as a concert pianist, and so he actually restores pianos as well. So he has a whole business of you know, if you've got an old broken down Steinway, he'll get it back into shape again. But he is a very interesting man, and you know, it was one of those moments of inspiration on my part that led me to his door, and you know, I couldn't have written the novel without his help.
Well, I wanted to know from this man, we live in Switzerland, Herr Martin, Herr Martin, actually, how he became a piano tuner. And first I told him about the book and said we were going to be talking with you, and would he mind if I videoed some of what he was doing so that I could show our group what it was. And so of course he just really put everything into it, and then he found one key that wasn't sounding so well. But I asked him how he became a piano tuner, and he said, "I am a piano builder."
Oh, right. Yes, exactly. Well, in my yes, they now like to be called piano technicians as well, not piano tuners, apparently. So, no, it's you know, none of these great pianists could function without their piano tuners. You know, it's a bit like architects and engineers. You know, an architect does a drawing on the back of an envelope and then says to the engineer, "How do I build this?" And in a way, and Clive said very often he's been at a concert of a great pianist, and halfway through the concert he realizes the piano is out of tune, but nobody else does. You know, it's a real science, a real precision, technical, you know, it is almost an art in a way. You know, it's and great pianists like their pianos set up in particular ways, and somebody like Clive can do that for them. As I explore that in the novel, it's really fascinating. You know, it's transformed the way I listen to piano music now, having learned so much about it. You know.
Thanks, Marcy and Stephen. I think we've got one more left, Will, and that's from Jill. Jill, can you...
Hi there. Thanks very much for joining us, Will. I'm interested, a couple of times tonight when you've been talking, you've talked about the things that influence you, things that you're interested in at the time. You talked about pushing fiction into reality. I thought within the novel, one of the things that struck me as being quite resonant was Brody suffering from TB and the description that you imparted through the novel of his illness. And obviously he does he does die a young man, and that wasn't that uncommon at the period that the novel was written, but it does have a lot of resonance at the moment with COVID and it being a respiratory disease. So I think my question was really about the last 12 months. We've been in lockdown or semi-lockdown or partial lockdown in one shape, form or another. And I wondered what impact that had on you as a novelist. You know, your novels at the heart of them are about relationships. And I guess over the last 12 months, there's been some degree of polarization around the kind of relationships that people have had. They've either been forced together into a small space, and it's put a strain on relationships, or conversely, it's done the exact opposite. It's forced people apart. It's not allowed people who would normally socialize and be in relationships with friends, families, lovers, whatever it might be. And I just wondered how the kind of reality of the last 12 months has impacted on you in terms of what your inspiration is for kind of future literature that you might write, and how that kind of impacts on you as a novelist.
Well, it's a very good question. I mean, I'm like anybody else, you know, I've been affected by this whole process. I mean, thank goodness I'd written my novel before COVID arrived. But I think it's been, I've actually written a lot of journalism about it. I wrote a very big piece in the Times before Christmas, on Boxing Day, in fact, about the impact of the last months. And for me, it's I don't think people say, would you write a novel about the COVID experience? I said, absolutely not. I think it's too close, too soon, and all great novels are usually written, you know, 20 or 30 years after the events they describe. And I think that there's been no great novel about the 9/11 terrorist atrocity, for example, because it's still too soon, even if it's 20 years ago. So I think that I would never write about COVID, but it's been very interesting living through this period. And for me, and the thing that resonates with me is that, you know, we live very privileged, we have lived very privileged, easy lives on the whole for the last 70 years. You know, our world has sort of been at peace. And I think suddenly what it showed me was a sense of what it must be like to be in a war zone. And, you know, I remember in March of last year, these empty streets in London and the kind of almost a kind of terror or uncertainty. And in my novel, Any Human Heart, I imagined a young couple who had had their first child in 1939. And I went back in time and, you know, Hitler invades Poland, Britain declares war on Germany. That, you know, the feeling of the COVID crisis made me realize what it must have been like then. You know, my parents lived through the war. My mother was 14 when the war started, and I asked, and she had no idea how long it would last. You know, would it be 2 years or 10 years or 15 years? And so we hope the COVID thing's going to fizzle out in 2021 somehow or another. But I think what it did was totally destabilize your sense of what life was going to be like. And I think that's what it's like being in a war. You just don't know who's going to die, or if you're going to die, or if your life is going to be constrained for months or years. You won't be able to travel, you won't be able to see your friends, your family. And so for me as a novelist, it was you know, in a kind of objective, pragmatic way, it's very interesting to tap into my feelings, which I share with the entire population, of uncertainty and fear and the absence of a known future. You know, it was just a very interesting experience. And I think all novelists or all artists, in a way, you know, they're people first, and things happen to them, and then later they kind of put it through their brain and recycle it for, you know, for information. And that's what I've taken from this crisis, that I actually can imagine what it must have been like for my mother as a 14-year-old girl in 1939 at school, and suddenly the world is at war, and the blackout. We had, equivalents of, we didn't have gas masks, but we had masks, and you went out of the house with your mask. You didn't have to put blackout curtains up, but you couldn't see your friends. You only have doorstep meetings. So all sorts of things that we took for granted changed, and I think that's what shook me up, and I think has shaken everybody up. But in the novelist's brain, that shake-up will manifest itself somehow in maybe the next novel I write, but it sure as hell won't be about COVID crisis and 2021. But it's definitely made me think, and it's definitely, I mean, I have lived in a country at war. When I was a teenager, I was living in Nigeria during the Nigerian Civil War in the late 1960s and 70s. So I have sort of experienced, a country tearing itself apart, and roadblocks and armed soldiers and so on. But this, I was only a kid then, but this experience of COVID has actually made me think about, all sorts of conflicts. Imagine being a Syrian, this 13 years has been going on in Syria, this hideous war, and it's made me realize the very simple human cost, or not so much the human cost, the human recalculation that takes place when something so enormous and unprecedented and global occurs to you, and how you cope with it. It's definitely made me think, and I'll wait to see how it percolates down. And my next novel, scoop here, Paddy, is going to take place in the 19th century, totally. And it, but I'm sure what I've experienced in the last year will have an impact on my 19th century narrative.
Brilliant. Thank you for answering that.
Pleasure.
Thanks, Jill. One good thing about, if you can say it's a good thing about this situation, is that we have been so incredibly lucky as our humble book club to have the colossus of Sting and Will gracing us with their amazing presence and their amazing stories and their amazing intelligence as well. I mean, it's just, it's absolutely stunning. And for Sting to join us again tonight, it's just, well, I'm gobsmacked, basically. I can't say anything else.
Well, it's fantastic for me as well, Paddy, because, going back to Stars and Bars, I'm a great fan huge fan of Sting's music, and to have had this curious connection all those years ago, and to be able, thanks to you and your book club, to actually be able to say thank you to Sting for that wonderful song over the end credits is, I didn't see that one coming, I have to say. So thanks a million to you, and thanks to everybody for your really stimulating questions. I've had a ball. It's been great, and let's meet up face to face when the world returns to semi-normal, because as I say, I'm not very far away.
William, and before you go, if I may, is there any book you could recommend to our book club? Now you know us so well.
Oh gosh. There's a book there's two young novelists who I really like, and I've given them plugs and I've written about them, and one of them is a young woman called Evie Wilde, and her last novel came out. It's called The Bass Rock, and I think she's an extraordinary writer. This is her third novel, and I think Evie Wilde and the Bass Rock would be a very, very interesting novel to read. And the other one is a guy who's English-Hungarian, I think, and his name is David Szalay, Szalay. I think that's how you pronounce it. And he wrote a novel a couple of years ago called All That Man Is, which is a very funny, scurrilous novel about the European male. It's 9 different stories of 9 different men from all different ages. But I think it's a brilliant piece of work. And I was on a prize giving committee, and we gave him prize for this novel. So All That Man Is and Bass Rock would be two great contemporary novels, you know, just published in the last, actually Bass Rock was published in March. Poor Evie got the COVID lockdown as her book came out. But she's a tremendous writer. They're both tremendous writers, but and they're very stimulating, I think, for a book club, because there's lots to talk about. You know, there's nothing remotely boring or conventional about them. They're very, very kind of incisive and in a way, destabilizing in the best sense novels.
William, thanks so much. It was I'm really looking forward to reading these books now, and much like meeting you today, we were really looking forward to it as well, because it's something different from your lockdown every day same routine. So yes, thanks again.
Same for me. It's been a real pleasure. I've really enjoyed myself, and here I am in the middle of nowhere. So I've had a very stimulating evening, and thank you so much, and thank you, Paddy. And we'll stay in touch, and let's hope we can hook up and bump elbows.
That'd be great.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Will.
Thank you.
Applause, everybody. And Sting, thank you so much for joining us from New York.
Thank you. Yes, bump elbow to you too.
My pleasure, everyone.
Well, yes, we'll all meet up again.
Yeah, take care.
In the River House bar, when it eventually opens up.
Good idea. It's a deal, Paddy. Thanks so much. Bye, everyone. Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you very much.
Good night. We will meet again.
Cheers. Thanks, folks.
Bye.
Well done, Paddy. That was great. Well done. That was just worked
Thank
really
you so
well.
much for keeping this up.
I didn't do
way during
anything.
the lockdown.
Oh no, but amazing that Sting joined us as well, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah.
What a shocker.
Well, I